Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this month's edition of Side by Side Digital. I'm your host, Rebecca Shively. As 2020 comes to a close, it's a good time to take stock of how the year went and to think about planning for next year. This month, we have two of our experts here to answer your questions and guide us through some best practices when it comes to planning and budgeting. I'm pleased to welcome our two experts, Angie Treptow and Maggie Holub. I'll let them introduce themselves, but Maggie and Angie, thanks so much for being here today.
Thanks, Rebecca. Hi, everyone. My name is Angie Treptow. I'm our East Central Iowa Regional Vice President, or lead our lending team, and have been with the company for about 28 years. Maggie, I'm really excited about what we're going to visit about today in building a budget, but let's have you introduce yourself first.
Thank you, Angie. As Angie mentioned, I am Maggie Holub. I am a relationship officer in our Northeast Nebraska region. And I have had the privilege of working for Farm Credit Services of America for going on 11 years. I am extremely passionate about building budgets, which hopefully that shines here. But without further ado, we're going to dive right in, and we're going to start by asking the entire group a poll question on: do you currently put together a projection or a budget on an annualized basis? Do you have a business plan? Do you do both of those things, neither of those things, or one of them?
Well, we're a little spread out all over, which is good. 48% do an annual projection and budget. 5% a business plan, just short of 20% that are doing both, and 29% that do neither. So Maggie, tell us about what you do on your operation.
I answered that question with both, but then I started second guessing myself. I do an annual projection. What all goes into a business plan? Am I actually doing the right thing? So Angie, can you help me figure out what all goes into a business plan?
Yes, I think a business plan should start with what your objective is. Like what is the long-term view of where you want your operation at? And then talk a little bit about where it's at today. Kind of summarize like the makeup of your operation, how many acres you farm or how many livestock you feed. And then have it go into the goals that you're trying to accomplish for your operation. Is it expanding your operation? Is it growing that operation? Is it just wanting to maintain the operation? And then you bring in the financials, and those financials would consist of a balance sheet, an income statement, a projection. That projection might be that 3 to 5 year outlook that matches up with those goals. So based off of that, Maggie, where do you think you're at?
I have a business plan.
Very good.
I definitely write my goals, my personal mission statement for myself and the farm, and those big three items, which the last side-by-side webinar hit on one of them already. You had the ability to learn about balance sheets, that asset liability net worth at that snapshot in time. And then the other two components are that income statement and that cash flow, which we have a lot of different terms, I think here, Angie, that go into the budget, or we call a cash flow a budget. What's an income statement versus a cash flow? Help me understand that too.
Okay, so I want to make a point. And first, let's hit the income statement. A lot of times, producers will actually have their own records, and that's looking at what has taken place. So it's either tax returns are provided or their own records, whether it's from a software system that they use or it's their Excel spreadsheet, but it's actual records. The cash flow is what we're going to be focusing on today. And some people call that a cash flow. Some people call that a projection. Some people call that a budget. Some people could call it a cost of production. It's all those things in one. It's a matter of what your terminology is and what you're comfortable with. So Maggie, how about we both agree today, as we're going through this, we're going to call it a budget.
Got it. I like that. We're going to dive in. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I'm going to say we're going to dive into that cash flow piece of it in those big three items that we are working towards when we are doing all of our financial plan. So, I mean, what does a budget do for us? What is the benefit? I like to always sit down and ask myself, it's almost, I'm a gym fanatic, a fitness fanatic, so that's going to come out in this. It's like leg day in the gym. It is awful in the moment, but like good results come out of it, right? So that's what I think of when I think of budgeting. It's kind of painful, but it's very good. Why is that?
Well, I'm not quite that kind of a gym fanatic. I just like to go out and run or walk. But either way, there is some strategy to planning and preparing for it. But you're right. What is the real value of doing this? If I'm going to put the work, the time, the energy, the effort in, what is it going to gain me back? And I think one of those big things is it helps you figure out how you want to market your livestock and grain. If I know what the potential outcome of what my next year is going to look like in that budget, then I can kind of assess what price do I need to be shooting for when I'm trying to market my commodities.
I would agree with that. Marketing is probably the biggest piece, and I'd say the biggest piece of advice our customers are seeking when they meet with us. So, or meet with myself and you, Angie, probably. But I like to, it's also somewhat, I think of it as a time management piece too. So you are looking at, I like to do a monthly cash flow. We'll get to that here. There's several different types, but you figure out what you have to pay for in that month and what you need to sell to pay those bills, right? So it's cash inflow, cash outflow. You're trying to figure out what's going in and out. And it helps you figure out how much you have to sell. So you're not making that impulse buy, oh, I got to sell 1,000 bushels of grain today because I got to pay for fuel. So it helps you forward look.
Oh, that's a great point. Another way it can help us is determine our crop insurance level. So do we want our crop insurance to help us, take care of the cost of what it's going to cost us to put in that acre? Or do we want our crop insurance to protect us for a potential loss? I mean, what is it? But that also that cash flow could help you figure out where you want to be there as well in your crop insurance decisions.
That's a very, very good point. Speaking of those inputs and covering all those expenses, I mean, that's a lot of the reason why we get crop insurance, right? To cover those items. It will help you figure out how much you can spend on some of those big ticket items too, and when you have to pay for them. Going a little deeper, I was really thinking about this too. It really can help you if you're thinking about growing, if you're thinking about expanding, if you're thinking about maybe taking more of a family operation over, adding livestock. If you have to, I'm going to dive right into maybe a new piece of equipment or land purchase. It helps you figure out in your cash flow, if I have to finance it, should I set up those payments, or can I put a little bit of cash down and then finance part of it? So that also is a very good reason for a budget.
Right. Yeah. You get to that bottom line of that budget number, and it's what can I afford outside of what's already in consideration in my budget. And it's really planning out, like, if I do purchase something and I borrow that money, do I have the cash flow, the budget money available to make that payment on that loan that I may have to take out? I think another thing that, it's a little ways off for probably a lot of us on this call today, but is that long-term succession planning. Someday we all might want to bring in a son or a daughter into this operation, or another family member, or what's going to happen with my operation when I decide that I want to retire or maybe not farm anymore. So I think it helps with that as well.
You're pulling on my heartstrings there a little bit, Angie. I am extremely passionate about succession planning. I can speak to it directly. I lost my dad at 26, and we did not have a succession plan on our farm, and it was to my sister and myself to figure out. And if I would have taken the time and asked those awkward, hard questions to my dad about the financials of our farm, it would have helped a ton. So I can't stress that enough, especially to our audience on this call. It's not the easiest thing to talk about, but you will learn something, and hopefully it will help your operation grow in the future and keep it going in the family. So I don't
Maggie,
mean to be, go ahead.
Thank you for sharing that story, because it is real. We see it in our business every day, where something happens, unfortunately, and somebody who's a key person in that operation may be gone. And if you have a business plan to go back to, as we described earlier, it really helps you understand where the operation's at. And if at a minimum, if you have that budget, that'll also help you figure out where that operation's at, so you can pick up the pieces and keep that operation going. So now let's move on to what does it do for your lender? So let's talk a little bit about that. So I think this chart kind of is a really good picture of what it does for your lender, but also what it does for you. So how can you use your budget? So first of all, you have data. Data is just the numbers that you're putting into that cash or that budget. And it's like, for example, if I farm 500 acres and 250 of those acres are corn, that's data. And 250 acres are soybeans, that's data. And then I can put in my average yield from my crop insurance, and I'm already starting to build that budget for that next year. And once I have all that data, that is knowledgeable piece of information for me. I can look at that and I can take assessments of, one, how is my bottom line? Am I going to budget out that I'm making money, or do I need to make some adjustments? So knowledge is powerful, because now we can make some decisions. And then we go to insights. Now with my insights, Maggie, this gets back to what you were talking about. Now I can start making decisions on, do I want to expand my operation? Do I want to grow? Do I want to bring somebody else into the operation? Maybe I want to even add another piece to my operation, such as custom farming, custom finishing, custom spraying. It gives us insights to make decisions around our operation. Then we go on to implications, and what are the implications if I do those things? So then I can take that data, I have all that knowledge, I've got some insights, and now I can start playing with that and say, what if scenarios? What if I did this? What if I did that? And what would it look like? And now we're all done. We get to make some actions. We get to go out and we get to do what we really love to do, and that's farm. Thoughts on that, Maggie?
Yeah, so I feel a little selfish because I always ask customers for a cash flow, and I feel like it's a piece that they always think their lender needs or we require, which we do. But I look at it from a producer hat standpoint, and that last box really resonates with me, the actions. This allows us as producers to be the CEO in our operation. It allows us to make those big decisions, so then we can go out and do what we love, which is grow corn, soybeans, corn, cattle, whatever it is in your operation. That's what we have the passion for. But we're running million-dollar businesses, so we need to have that budget and that cash flow. And I also hit on this earlier, I can't stress it enough, but it does help with time management. I know we're all busy humans. We all have a lot going on. We have kids, we have crops, we've got church things we're responsible for. I don't know, whatever it is, but there is time in the day to carve out for this, because it is very important. So that, I can't stress that enough. I guess that's where my passion lies around it, but it does help make our actions.
Well, and the other thing I think it helps too is setting you up for financial success and for decisions down the road. So let's think about if I show my budget and it shows that I'm making money, and I do actually make money, that then turns into building my balance sheet, which provides me working capital, which provides me financial strength to make more decisions for my operation down the road. So it has that impact. And it builds your net worth, that gives you more flexibility to want to be able to do things in your operation.
So at full circle, it builds right back into that business plan, right? Your long-term goals are more than likely to build net worth, build the farm, pass it to the next generation. If we stay in tune to those day-to-day budget decisions, we hope and pray things will go right, by watching that, and we'll build that balance sheet for the future.
So Maggie, from a producer's perspective, what are some other things that you think outside of time management that's important for us to put into our budget?
Yeah, a budget, it's easy for us as farmers to think about the seed, the fertilizer, the chemical, all that stuff that goes into it from a day-to-day standpoint. But it's also bigger than that. What is your interest payments you're paying on any sort of loan, land loan, equipment loan that you got to factor into your budget? So payments and interest. And then I also like to look at family living. Is the farm, like, do you have to use the farm to support all the family living? Is there some off-farm income? Is there other avenues to cover that? And I mean, a rule of thumb here, $50 to $100 an acre to live. So that's also a big component of that budget. So I have two budgets, personal and farm, but they all kind of intermingle, right? So I challenge everyone to have a personal budget and a farm budget.
Oh, that's a really good idea, because I find when producers, when we work with the budget, the first part of it, the income, that seems pretty easy to me as a producer, because I know what I'm going to farm next year, and I know how well I do of raising that crop or that livestock. And so I can really predict out my potential income there. Where it gets a little tougher is my expenses. So sometimes, as producers, we'll look at those expenses, and some of them are pretty simple in the sense of seed chemical fertilizer. We do that every year, but then there's some other expenses that just not sure. One of the things that I coach producers on is look at your 3-year historic information and take an average, and then use that to figure out your expenses for that next year's budget.
That's
Any other quick ideas you have on there? I want to come back to family living, but let's hold that for a second. Any other quick ideas you have on figuring out your budget?
That's very good advice. That 3-year average, whether it's, a profit and loss you've ran from your QuickBooks, or if it's your income tax expense, your tax return, line those things out. And I know here on our financial reports we run for customers, we have that 3-year average, and it is something I print out. And you lay that 3-year average down, and you lay last year's projection out. And I'll get back to that because there's another piece that's important there. But you can figure out, were you on track with the budget and what was historical, and plan for forward looking into 2021. What are we going to hit on again for family living?
So family living. So we talk about that expense part, and it's harder to figure. The farming part may be hard, but when you get to the family living, it's even harder. It's harder for a number of reasons, because a lot of us don't track it. And it happens so quickly. We go to the grocery store, or we go to a ball game. And so it's a little harder to get our hands around what that family living expense is. And I know some people will track it through, like a spreadsheet, or do like you do and have a separate one that will help you figure out and keep a budget of actually do the actual, and then use that as your budget to starting point next year on the family living.
Yeah.
Maggie, I see we got a question here, and it kind of gets to this point a little bit. Do you use Excel spreadsheet for your personal budget, or some kind of software app?
That's a very good question. I like to keep things as simple as possible. I'm not ultra techie, but what I do is I look at the Schedule F you file with your accountant, or you file in your tax returns. Each one of those line items on that Schedule F has a tab at the bottom of my Excel spreadsheet. And then I also have tabs for family living, which would be groceries and personal gas and all of my crazy fitness stuff. But it all goes in that spreadsheet, and it all runs through one credit card and one checking account. I just separate it out individually that way.
Oh, very good. Okay, so that's one idea, is a person could use Excel spreadsheet. There is softwares out there that people can use, and there is opportunities for information to utilize, which we'll go through here in a little bit. We'll show you some things, but I think sometimes it's the expectation of, maybe you're asking your lender, do you have a form that I can use to prepare my budget? or do you have an idea of a software? That's another place they could start.
Yeah, that's we have a couple different sheets that we can aid customers in here, but we also do have, we were that Zero program that we have, or that we were paired with, and then also QuickBooks. I know my sister personally uses QuickBooks. She farms as well, and that has worked out really well for their operation. So there are options. My biggest piece of advice would be, don't make it complicated.
Yeah, for as a lender, if you're coming as a producer to look at requesting financing, it doesn't have to be flashy. It doesn't have to be fancy. Just something that helps us start facilitating a conversation to better understand your operation and where you want to go with your operation, and whether or not there's things that we can learn and insights that we could provide on how to reach profitability in the operation. And if they are profitable, getting back to the insights and implications and the actions, then, do I want to make adjustments in my operation to grow it or expand it? I think the important thing is just writing it down and getting a start somewhere. I think sometimes that's the hardest thing when it comes to doing budgets, is that it's the start. And much like your workout program, Maggie, I'm sure it was the get out of bed and go and start. So talk about how that helps you. Well, what started you to get to do this?
Yeah, it's very overwhelming. It's like walking into the gym and you have no plan. All the machines are intimidating, all the people are intimidating, and you're just scared and it's awkward. Getting started, I sense some I have a lot of passion around it. I think we're getting the crowd excited about it. So let's just dive into, how do you get started? There's numerous tools. You can use the Ag Decision Maker with Iowa State or whatever state you're operating in. Generally, those land-grant universities have great resources. I'll talk to you a couple of the different things we have here at Farm Credit. If you look at your screen, there's that production expenses box, and then also that cash flow we have that we can put together on our tool called AgriPoint. So you can log into there and do your balance sheet and do your cash flow, which I know after this webinar is done, we will send out a link on some step-by-step instructions on walking through how to get to that cash flow and AgriPoint. But they will mirror pretty much what we do as officers, or what your financial officer is going to ask you for in a cash flow. So that would be where I would start.
I think that's a great idea. Some people, the first time you start, I would probably pull out my historical tax returns and use that as my starting point, like we talked before, and then use that to help guide me for my information going forward. You said the land-grant universities, and I know there's a lot of great tools out there, not only ISU Decision Maker, but K-State has one. I believe the University of Minnesota has one. Illinois has one. So if you just type in cash flows or agricultural cash flows, you could pull up something. But never hesitate to call Farm Credit Services of America, and we can get you one as well. I got a question for you.
Okay.
So best time to do a budget?
I would say we're in the season of budget planning right now, and I feel like it comes earlier and earlier each year. I would say right now, because if you're a grain farmer, you have all of your grain in one bucket, right? In your bins or at the elevator or wherever. So you know how 2020 turned out. And you probably have seed guys knocking on your door, and you probably have chemical people wanting money or wanting you to lock things in, or fertilizer. So you have a really good idea of what things are going to cost you for next year. So this is where I was going, is that budget is a piece of information you're going to keep updating throughout the year. So as you get those actual items or dollar amounts for your seed, your fertilizer, your chemical, you can keep updating. You can go back to that budget and keep updating it with those actual expenses. And then as you get planting or you get into the fields, what you can actually track what you've used. So that was my big point I was going to make is don't table your budget after you've done it for yourself and your lender. Get it out, dust it off the shelf, and go back to it. But make it something that you always visit.
Yeah, you bring up a great point, because a lot of times, we're collecting this data, we're doing our budget, we use it for some knowledge, and then we set it aside, and that doesn't help us get the insights and make the decisions. And what I really like is if you have your budget, and then you copy that. And then within that copy, then you put in your actual so that you can compare that budget. So what I truly budgeted, say we're budgeting now for 2021. I look at that budget for 2021, and as I'm going through 2021, I can go back and update with my actuals and then compare that actual to what I had budgeted, because I may need to start making some adjustments. We have weather situations, we have market changes, we have other things that are outside of our control that happens within our economy that we may need to step back and say, oh, something maybe cost me a little bit more than I had budgeted. And now I might need to make an adjustment somewhere else in my budget. And where would I make that adjustment? So if we continue to look at the information throughout the year, it can become very powerful to be able to make adjustments more quickly for our operation as we're going through it.
I think of it, you make up a good point there. I think of it right now with the grain market rallying the way it is. I mean, if you change $4 corn to $4.20, how does that change your cash inflow? And if you do have a couple hiccups along the way, you can maybe handle it, or it goes the other way. So it does provide you some sensitivity analysis in your operation too for that income stream. But I'm going to circle back to your time question, and I'll make it a little less personal or a little less, I guess, bank oriented for the answer there, lender oriented. Do it when it fits into your schedule. I can't stress time management enough, as you have to reach into your own human brain and figure out what works for you. I mean, right now is a slower time for, I would say, a good amount of producers if they have their field work done. Maybe now is the time to sit down. You're probably forward looking, putting your tax stuff together, meeting with your accountant. So maybe right now is a good time to do it. Maybe it's February. I don't know. Maybe it's in July. July might be a good time, but you have to figure that out when you have the best time management.
Another thing to be thinking about is if it's not something that you feel like you're great at, maybe there's somebody else in your operation, such as a spouse or another family member, or your tax accountant or your lender, somebody who is willing to help you work through that.
I love it.
Yes.
So maybe that's not the job for you. So you pick out that chief financial officer you want to help you. But my biggest advice would be, I'm going back to my gym analogy, make sure they're a stellar accountability partner. You can't just hand it off all on them, because at the end of the day, you still have to make all the decisions because you're the CEO, right?
Right.
So make sure you're meeting with that person who does your financials to make sure you're on track and then keep you up to date.
Yes. And sometimes I think we get lost monthly or annually, quarterly. I don't know if that really matters either. It's about what feels good and makes sense for you. And if it's your first time doing it, what do you think's easier, a monthly or a annual?
I always start with my annual. And then
that's where I would be too.
And then I'll dive into that month by month basis.
Yeah, I would say if I was starting out, I'd start annually, and then maybe year 2 or maybe year 3, I build a little confidence in it, and then maybe I go monthly or quarterly.
Yeah. Maybe that's budgeting 2.0. Maybe we need to have another.
There you go. Maybe that's right. We'll see what kind of feedback we get on this one.
Yeah. So putting it all together. Let's just wrap it up here and put it all together, right?
Yes.
I think we've highlighted on this, start early and I don't procrastinate on it. Figure out what works in your schedule and get that cash flow put together, because if your lender is going to be asking for it. And I think with all the crazy COVID environment going on, it's probably one of the better times to actually focus on it. So you never know what curveball you're going to get or black swan event, right?
Right.
Not to be negative Nancy.
Keep good records.
I was going to say, consider using that AgriPoint tool or that Excel spreadsheet. If that works for you, we will send out a link for that AgriPoint demo and how to log in there and get to it. I'll let you chime in there. Angie, you were going to say something.
Well, I was going to say, if you keep good records throughout the year, that also is positive, that I think we should be focusing on.
Makes the task a little less daunting if you've done it more periodically throughout the year. And submit things ahead. We always love to see, this is my little lender plug, that you've got your cash flow done and you've put thought into it. And it helps us aid and facilitate conversations with you when we meet to renew or review your operating needs for the next year, going into the next year.
Yeah. So Maggie, we got some great questions coming in here. So let's take a chance and start working on these. What are the biggest mistakes you see people make with their budgets? And I'm going to start first on that one. I think the biggest mistake that people make is not doing it. That's the first one. People not doing a budget, that can be a mistake because it doesn't help you make decisions for your financial operation if you don't do it. The second one, I wouldn't say a mistake. I never think of these as mistakes. I think these are kind of learning things, but I would say they put it on, they do it, and then they put it on the shelf and they never look at it. I think it's going to be important for us to look at it. And maybe the third one is we need family living calculated in there too. Off-farm income also, all forms of income, all forms of expenses.
I would
the
say
next question, Maggie, I'm going to hand over to you.
Okay.
How do you use my budget to get my break even?
How do you use your budget? So what I like to do, I was talking to that sensitivity analysis piece, and it depends on if you like to look at your cost of production or your break even on a bushel basis, or on, like I need 220 bushels of corn at $4. Those are the elements I like to tinker with. So I'll put in all of my variable expenses, and then what does my yield look like at a certain price to cover everything, or vice versa, without actually going through like a tool, like a spreadsheet that I have to walk you through that. That's the easiest way I can articulate it without a diagram.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to explain, but basically what I would say is you get to the bottom of your budget, and then you have to do a little math and take your number of acres and divide it by that number, and that will tell you per acre. Now, that doesn't get you to an enterprise level. It doesn't get you to corn or soybeans, but it gets you to what is the break even for per acre, and then you can start kind of slicing and dicing and breaking it down from there. We do have another question, and this is a really good one, because I know we have a lot of young and beginning farmers on our call today. So where does a beginning farmer start? How can you create a budget if you do not have historicals? That is a great question. I think one area you can go to is the land grant universities. So I'm most familiar with, because I'm in Iowa, I'm most familiar with the Ag Decision Maker that Iowa State creates. That's a good place to start. You can also go to your lender and have conversations and say, how do I start this budget without having historics? And it starts with, what is your operation made up of that you're going to be going into that next year? And then start with the income, and then what's each cost. And some of it may be that first year you're just kind of filling your way through and doing as good of a budget as you can. But I think that as you go through this, you'll learn every year, you'll get better at doing budgeting. Maggie, you have any thoughts on that?
I do. This piece, I can it brings back a lot of memories. I remember where I was, and I can't reiterate this enough. This would be the best time to reach out to your farming mentor and say, what do I do, or how do I do this? That's one piece of advice. The other one is learning by error, trial by fire, drinking from a garden hose. I don't care what it is, but it's easy. Easy is probably not the right way to say that, but you know, or I hope you should know what acres you're going to be farming. That's that crop plan. Or how many head of cattle you're going to have. That's that livestock plan. So that income piece is very easy. Then it's actually really cool, because here's where you get to build those relationships. Talk to the seed guy and figure out how much per bag, per acre is seed. Talk to that fertilizer rep. This is where you learn. This is where you grow. And those are those big pieces that you get to fill into that puzzle. And then if you have to borrow any money, you figure out your interest expense, and that's where your lender can step in and help. And you figure if you've got any equipment, you can figure the depreciation on that. That's the fun, I guess that's where I get pretty passionate about it, because I went through that whole learn by error process. And maybe it's a little bit of tough love on my dad's part. Maybe he thought I'd be a better manager just trying to figure it out myself than having to spoon feed it to me. But ask for help. I was really bad about that. That'd be my other biggest piece of advice.
Great advice. So here we have another question. How do you know when it's the right time to expand? How do you keep from getting in over your head? I think that's a great question to ask. And the first thing that's most important about that is the fact that you're asking the question, because a lot of times as producers, we don't ask the questions. We want to expand, so we just do it. And we need that financial information and that financial data to help us make that decision. And so one, I would say, really look to your partners to help you with these answers. Work with that lending officer that can help guide you, because that's what they're there for. They're there to help coach, guide, counsel, provide advice. So let's take the first part. How do I know when it's the right time to expand? I don't know if for everybody it's always the right time. The more important thing is positioning yourself financially so that any time financially could be the right time. Because in farming, what we know is we didn't know that the land next door was going to come up for sale until it did, or we didn't know that next farm was going to be able to be rented until it did. So the most important part is putting yourself in a financial position that you're ready to expand when it is the right time. And then the second part is, okay, now it's the financial question. How do I make sure I don't go in over my head? When we do that budget and we get to that end of that number, then we're going to say, okay, if I did this, if I expanded and added 40 acres to my operation, what is that going to cost me? And the way you could do that again is take that budget number, the end result, so my income minus my expenses after I have everything in there, and say it comes out to be a number. Take that divided by your number of acres that you may have today. And then if I'm going to add 40 acres, I would add that number times 40 into that, and then make sure I add that debt service if I have any, or that rent income if I'm depending on if I'm renting or purchasing that farm.
I could go, that is a very loaded question. And as producers, when is the right time? We don't know, right? I'm going to go to those three big pieces that we keep talking about: your balance sheet, your income statement, and your cash flow. And speaking from a young and beginning producer standpoint, we don't have the balance sheet, or I don't have the balance sheet, I'll just flat out say it, to know if it's the right time to grow, right? Or if I have the wherewithal to make a mistake. So I'll take that cash flow that I've put together for my normal year, and if I'm looking at going into something different, I'll run a scenario, adding 40 acres, for example, that you were talking about, and see, does it work? And if it doesn't, do I have the working capital on my balance sheet to weather maybe a hiccup? So that's where you do a lot of that circle back and use all those big 3 pieces in figuring out if you should grow or not.
Very good. Okay, so Maggie, we're at 40 minutes, so we're going to answer one more question here.
That went
What
so
are
fast.
what are some good habits you see in successful operations when it comes to budgeting? I would say the good habit I see is that they do it and then they compare that budgeted to their actuals throughout the year. What would you say, Maggie?
Figuring out what works best for your operation, but you can break it down on that annual basis, that monthly basis. I've seen a lot of successful producers do it field by field, crop by crop. I like the sensitivity box that some of the producers put together. Like if I raise 200 bushel corn, I need to sell it for $3. Or if I raise 210, I need to sell it for $2.90. That helps you make those on the fly business decisions. And I'd say those are some of the best practices. And if you can share it with your lender before we ask for it, that's also a really good thing.
Awesome. Well, Maggie, it's been fun visiting with you today, and we're going to kick it back to Rebecca so that she can close us out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you both, Angie and Maggie. Some really great advice and tips. I know I feel motivated to go update a budget right now. So thank you for everyone in the audience for submitting your terrific questions and for joining us today. We hope you'll join us next month on January 6th. We have a special guest. We'll have Naomi Bloom from Total Farm Marketing giving us a market outlook for 2021, as well as sharing her tips for creating successful marketing plans. So until then, we hope you have a happy holiday season, and we hope to see you in the new year on January 6th. Take care.